Welcome back to the Thinking Out Loud podcast. My name is Kevin Wilson.
And I'm Kyle.
And we're excited to have you guys back for another show today.
Yep. Kevin's giggling because we were just talking about some moments. Giggling. We were talking about some moments that we face just in life as dad, as men, as employees. And so I asked him, and I'm going to ask him on air. But Kevin, explain to us one of your most embarrassing moments that you faced. And I'm going somewhere with this, but explain to us, tell the audience, give a little insight on the life of Kevin and how he gets embarrassed.
So I actually have two. So I'm gonna give you the two.
I'm all ears for it. I love it.
So the first one, and I don't. Our audience, I don't know if you've been to our website and kind of know my background or anything like that. But you can go to our website. It's thinkingoutloudmedia.com. You can learn about both Kyle and I, see our families and stuff like that. But anyways, I have spent many years as a worship leader, and I went to a church one weekend, and I want to say that it was New Year's Eve service. And a lot of times when you preach or you lead worship or whatever, and people know that you do that there, you'll just get called. Like there's no, like sometimes there's no warning. They're just like, hey, you know what? We found out Kevin is here. Let's have him come up and say something or play something or sing something, whatever. Right. So it's New Year's Eve. And God's moving in this service, just a great service. So they call me up to lead a couple of worship songs. And so they call me up and I come to the piano or the keyboard. And so it's just me singing and playing the keyboard. Okay. Now, mind you, I don't think I've ever been to this church before. I didn't know their system, their setup. I didn't know their keyboard. I didn't know anything. I get on the keyboard and and I go through my first song. Everything's great. The Spirit of God is moving. I go to hit something. I don't know if it was strings or something on the keyboard. And all of a sudden, the keyboard started playing a song on its own. I don't know if you guys remember having a keyboard when you were little and getting it for your kids, and you press a button and it plays, I don't know, Ring Around the Rosie. I don't know. I mean, that's a bad song.
All right, Kev. Playing Ring Around the Rosie during worship.
Right. Whatever it was. Anyway, it started playing this like upbeat, like just crazy song. And we're like in the middle of God moving, people are worshiping, and I transition to the next song and it just plays whatever it wants to play. That was embarrassing. All right. No, so that's one.
No, how did you react? What you gotta tell us? Like what did the people do? How did you react?
So the people, I mean, obviously the people just stopped, like they're just looking up there, like, whatever. And so I look to the left.
Is he playing hokey pokey in the middle of worship? Do I stick my right foot in or my left arm?
Man, I actually know somebody who is a very skilled musician that showed me. He plays. So like, I don't know if you guys, this is about to go down a road, Kyle.
Take it. Kevin, take the wheel.
Okay. So listen. So if you grew up, if you don't know me, you should know by now, if you listen to the show, I'm black.
What?
So,
you're black?
I'm black.
No, if you listen to the show, you would understand that he's an anomaly. He's black, but he ain't black.
Oh my goodness. So here's the thing. I grew up in obviously a black church. I grew up in a black church. And so with black gospel music and the whole like playing the organ and stuff like that while people are preaching, and then like the shouting music and people like whatever, you know, and I'm not a part of any churches like that now. That is just not my thing. You know, I will always have a deep appreciation for gospel music, but all my worship leading career has all been Christian contemporary. Like I'm not the, you know, kind of preacher. And so anyways, but I say that to say I grew up in that. And so there was a musician. So like we would have these times where people would just shout and they would just run around the church and they would play music. This dude would play stuff like Little Mary Had or Mary Had a Little Lamb. He would like sneak in all kinds of stuff while people were shouting. Dude, literally hilarious. And he did it one night. And
was he trolling people? Like, was he like, let me see if they catch this?
Yes, that's basically what he was doing.
That's genius, dude. That's
genius. Like
that's God-given talent.
Right? Okay, so real quick, because I want to get into the rest of the show, because we have a like super important show today.
We do.
But my next embarrassing moment. So I work by day in human resources, and so you know, I hire people, fire people, that whole thing, right? And so there was somebody that we were going to fire that no one knew about, of course. And we had just made the decision that we're going to fire this person. So I wanted to give one of the owners a heads up. So what I did was I texted the owner and said, hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up that
I already know where this was going.
That we are firing so-and-so. Just, I don't want you to be surprised. Just letting you know we're getting rid of this person today. So in my phone,
phones get too many people in trouble.
Oh my goodness. So in my phone, and I don't even know how this happened. So I have one of the owners, like I have his number, his cell phone number, but also somehow the main number to our company, like that you would call into, is also it was saved under his contact information. And so when I text it didn't go to him. It went to the entire office staff. So as they're in their cubicles, like doing their work, all of a sudden this alert shows up, because the way our software works is we have CSRs, and all of us in the office use this software. Yeah. Okay. And also the same software is used by the field staff. Ooh. So this is, yes. So like I look at my text, like I send the text, I look at my phone, and I can't remember at the moment, but I want to say that I got the alert too, because I have this software open too.
Your software alerted you.
Yes. And I'm looking and I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Like I just alerted. So at the moment, I thought that the field staff also got this. Literally, you have never seen a chubby guy run as fast as I did. I ran down to the person that's ahead of IT. And I was like, man, could you tell me, like, I just sent out this text and it was only supposed to go to one of the owners. Did it go out to everybody? And she was like, let me check. And so she checked, and I was like, please tell me it didn't go out to all the field staff, because there's like 100 field staff. And I was like, please tell me it didn't. And she was like, no, it didn't go out to all the field staff, but it went out to every other person in the office, including that person's manager. So I ran to the manager's office, and I was like, dude, did you just see what I did? And he just dropped his head and he goes, yeah, dude. Like, how did that happen? And I was like, man, I don't even know. Like, I didn't know that the owner, like, I didn't know that our main line was attached to his contact information. So literally the most unprofessional, embarrassing moment that I've ever had in my career. Now, this person, thank God, they worked in the field and not in the office, so they didn't get the alert. But everyone knew that day that we were letting this person go in the office because
Hey, it's not
he,
unprofessional. It's an accident.
man.
Accidents happen. The reason I asked was because I had an unprofessional incident happen in the candy aisle of Walmart the other night with my almost 3-year-old daughter. So what happened is Brooke and I were like, Easter's coming up. We want to get the girls some baskets, and they're with us, so we have to be a little incognito about this. So let's take them. We got to go get some stuff for work and whatnot. So let's just act like we're going on a trip. And I was like, well, I want to get the girls Nerf guns. We don't have any Nerf guns at the house. They love Nerf guns. They play with their grandparents. So I want to get them Nerf guns for Easter. And I was like, we're stepping the game up too. We're getting them like sweet Nerf guns. So, like the ones they got with their grandparents, they hurt. Like they're powerful. They're sweet. They're just like the little pump action ones that
Yeah.
this one is like you could just keep shooting now. I'm like, I want the rapid fire.
Well,
So but anyway, so I was like, I want to make sure it shoots just as strong as the one their papa got them. So anyway, we get there, we get the guns. I get them in the car. I'm like, okay, we got to go to the candy aisle. We get to the candy aisle, and my daughter looks at me. She's in the cart, and there's people all around me, and she's like, Daddy. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, I farted. And so I'm like, I giggle a little bit. I'm like, okay, babe, that's fine. And like the woman next to me, she giggles. For the next 5 minutes, my daughter proceeds to scream throughout the store as I'm walking to the register. I farted. I farted. Daddy, I farted. And the more that I'm telling her, Blakely, stop saying that. It's not funny anymore. The more funny she thinks it is. So she continues to holler that she farted throughout the store. And the little like innocent giggles turned into like obvious annoyance. Like people were like, you know what I'm saying? Like looking at you like, you tell her to stop saying that because it's not funny anymore. No, she continued to say it. And so usually farting for me is not embarrassing, but when it was like a broken toy, dude. Like I could not get her to stop. I was like, I gotta physically remove her from the store from screaming, not just saying it, screaming, Daddy, I farted. So that was funny. That was embarrassing, a little unprofessional. But I thought it was just a good little question to ask because I was in the process of getting them a step up in their Nerf guns. And the topic we're talking about today is a very important one that we face in our nation. We're always going to face this conversation. A lot of what we talk about are going to be topics that, for the most part, are going to stick around. We're just helping people navigate through them. And that topic today isn't Nerf gun control, but it is gun control.
Yeah, for sure. And this is an issue that's been hotly debated. I mean, you guys know this has been hotly debated in the church and outside the church. And this is one of those issues that divide people. People get, I mean, you are either on one side or the other. And it's not like you're like on the fence. It's like you're way over on one side or the other. And at its core, I mean, I would say it's a very emotional issue, and I think that's why, it becomes such a topic, because none of us want violence. None of us wants to see the things that we're seeing. I mean, we just recently had the Colorado shooting of this young man who shot up a bunch of people. I think it was 10 people or so at Supers in Colorado.
And one was a police officer.
Yeah. I mean, so, we see that, and no matter your political persuasion, you sit on your couch and you're watching the news and you just go, something's got to be done. Something's got to happen here. Like, this is just not, but the question of what should be done is, I think, that's the big question, right? And that's where we become divided. So today we're going to go through 10. So here, let me set it up this way. So when you're at Christmas and you're around the Christmas dinner table, Thanksgiving, somebody's birthday party, whatever. These things come up, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to somebody on Facebook or whatever, or you see a post, right? And so these things are going to come up. And I think a lot of times when people see arguments for or against, you just don't know how to respond because you're not like you who sits down and researches gun control. Like, you know what I'm saying? We did because because this is what we do this is what we do,
Because
um
what we say is going to be on air forever.
right,
So,
exactly. But for you, a lot of times you're like, I don't even get the whole gun control thing. Like, I don't even. So we're gonna help you today. We want to go through like 10 of the most common arguments that people make about gun control, and just kind of go through those. And like we say all the time, guys, we're not interested in saying one side or the other. Our at the end of the day, it's, are we, what does the Bible say? Does the Bible say anything about this? Can we glean anything from the word in principle or directly from scripture? Like, what do we do with this as Christians? Because at the end of the day, we have to navigate culture from a biblical perspective. That's our whole show. Like, that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we're going to do today, and go from there.
Yeah. And the reason, we hovered over this topic for a little bit because we didn't know exactly how to approach this topic because of what Kevin said. I mean, you hear about it, you see a post on Facebook, is you're with your family, you're with your friends. Odds are there are just two very opposing sides to this.
Yep.
And I think that's where this gun reform, because that's what this is. It's gun reform. And as a gun owner, I'll just let you know, as a gun owner, I don't like hearing the words gun reform. I don't. Because there has been, and this is where the arguments turn sour, there has been a lack of trust with our government.
Yeah.
And so when you get to a place in society where you say, what is the agenda behind the agenda? That's a very vulnerable place to be as a citizen.
Yeah.
And so it's not that people necessarily, like myself, want to take the argument way to the right or way to the left, but naturally as a human, you feel like you have to protect something you think might be taken away. And so even as a gun owner myself, who's more for the gun rights side of things, I've had to educate myself in ways that I didn't want to. I didn't want to go down that path. I didn't want to do it. But what I found myself doing was taking one article that was biased towards my belief and arguing that article. And then all it did was steer the gun control person in their direction to go even further into their pit of things and say, well, now I've got to protect this even harder. And I realized those arguments, they're not getting anywhere.
No.
Nothing's getting done. And the thing about it is where one side argues gun control, we see the other side responds with, you can't take my guns.
Right.
There's a lack of trust because it seems like, and I'm giving my side, I'm not saying my side is right. I want you guys to understand that. I think that it's good for us to be vulnerable on the show and allow you to understand where we're coming from as we go through these top 10. And these top 10 discussions, they're the top 10 across the board. So they're not the top 10 in your home. They're not the top 10 in my home. They're the top 10 across the board. What is being talked about in gun reform legislation wise, and why is this being pushed? That's what we're going to talk about today. But it does seem like, from my vulnerable standpoint, it seems like at times guns are being singled out as the main list of reasons for homicides.
Yeah.
And to me, that doesn't sit well. And we're going to talk about some of this, but because of that feeling, I think that even myself, I've gotten off of the truth at times. And I think that the gun control side, they've gotten off the truth at times that guns protect us from higher authority. Guns protect us from our own government. And I think that we've landed on the fallacy that guns are the main reason for mass murders and homicide. Statistics are all over the board. Kevin and I, we've done the research. It's hard. Yeah. When you talk about gun control, it's hard to find. I don't think I'll ever allow someone to give me a statistic about gun control after doing research. Because where gun control says, here's the statistics of homicides, gun rights activists are showing the same statistics when guns aren't involved. And so there's no there's really no statistic that's solid
Yeah.
that across the board that says this is what it is with and without guns. There's just no statistic for that. And the reason being is because homicides are happening with
Right.
guns or without guns.
Right.
Now, the Second Amendment, before we get into this, the Second Amendment has never been about how can we get others to stop murdering people.
Right.
And I think this is where we've kind of gotten off when we talk about gun reform, and we're focusing on we got to get people to stop murdering people. Kevin and my heart, our heart is that people will stop murdering people. Our heart is that racist people would stop being racist. Our heart is that evil would be eradicated from the earth. But truth
Right.
be told, with gun laws or without gun laws, with the NAACP and with educating people on racism or without it, it's still going to be here. So
Absolutely.
we can't itemize items and we can't itemize things and say that's the reason. And that's where this argument has really come to a forefront. And I think once both sides can agree that guns aren't the main reason for
Mm-hmm.
murders
Mm-hmm.
and that the Second Amendment has to be respected. However, I think the other side of it is guns are still very dangerous, and there needs to be laws set in place that are going to help protect people in general that do not infringe on our constitutional rights. Once we can agree to that, I don't think anything's going to happen in this debate. And one quick example to that before we get into the one of the top arguments, you think about 9/11. You think
Mm-hmm.
about what security checkpoints looked like before 9/11. You think about what travel looked like before 9/11. And then we started to realize all of a sudden terrorists were using planes to kill people.
Right.
Planes weren't taken away from us at that point, right? They didn't say,
Right.
okay, we're going to stop taking planes. What they did, though, is they heightened security. Now, all of a sudden, TSA lines, they're 2 hours long.
Yeah.
Baggage checks, things like that. And I don't know that I've ever sat in a security check line for an airport and said, I am tired of waiting 2 hours to get on this plane. I wish that we just skip all of this. I never said that. I think I've gladly sat in the 2 hour line and said, okay, it may take a little longer for me to get on this plane, but I'm getting on this plane. And I'm
Right.
going to get on this plane and it's going to be safe.
Yep.
And I think as a gun owner, I need to remember that when I hear laws of that, they're like, hey, we're thinking about making it a little harder or a little longer process for you to get your guns. Instantly for me, Kevin, I go, oh no, they're going to try to take my gun away. They're
Right.
going to try to deny me my gun. No, they're not. No, they're not. What they're saying is the same way that TSA is, hey, it's going to take a little longer for you to get on this plane, but we're making sure there's no bombs going on this plane. We're not taking the plane away from you. It's just going to take longer for you to get it. But once you get it, it's going to be safer. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And the same with the gun laws. I think the gun control side of things, where they have it right, is, and I'm a gun owner and I don't like the gun control discussion, but I think where they have it right is, hey, listen, you're still going to get your gun in this process. It's just, it may take a little longer. We're going to do a little harder of a background check, and you may have to wait to a certain age to get it, but you're still going to get it. It's
Right.
just when you do, it's going to be safer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that if the gun control side can say, listen, our goal is just to make it safer,
Mm-hmm.
and the gun activist side, the gun rights side, can say, hey, I'm all about making it safer as long as my rights aren't infringed, I
Mm-hmm.
think then we can come to a common ground and we can start seeing some reform that actually helps both sides of things.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well said, Kyle. Well said, man. Yeah, and I just want to get into these, and guys, some of these you've heard people say. So you might be watching the news, and they're kind of going back and forth, Democrats versus Republicans, Republicans versus Democrats, whatever. And they've said these as talking points, and you're just like, okay, so let's drill down into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some of these you may not have heard, but this will educate you and help you if you haven't heard these arguments to be able to have a good in-depth conversation about it. So the first one, a lot of times this is one of the first arguments that we're going to talk about today is the Second Amendment only gives the right to own guns for use in a militia. So you might hear that somebody might say that. All right. So let me read to you what our Second Amendment actually reads regarding this. Okay. So, quote, a well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, end quote. Right. So, at that particular point, I think what we have to realize is our Constitution, and this is where I think people get confused, is our Constitution, it does not give us any rights. Like that's not what it's doing. People think about the Constitution as well, yeah, I've got rights, because of the Constitution. No, the Constitution doesn't give us any rights, but it affirms the rights that we already have, so that so that they're safeguarded, right?
Yeah.
So, if you notice that in what I just read from the Second Amendment, the right of the people, so quote, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, it isn't given by the language above, right? That's not it. But our right to keep and bear arms, which exists outside the Constitution, is protected from infringement, right? So the rights that we already have,
right,
outside the Constitution protects those rights. That's and I think this is where we get mixed up. And so I think it's understated, and I would say, just with anything else, like anything else, we just have to be careful when we're debating people, we're talking to our family members and stuff like this, because as Kyle said, it usually is fruitless. It leads to just nowhere, right? And I think until we sit down, we actually look at the facts and see what it actually says, we're going to be confused, and we're just going to be divided, and we'll never come to a good agreement. And most people that you talk to, they're not educated. They haven't done any research. They've listened to their favorite TV personality, radio talk show host, whatever the case may be. They told them and they love them. So they're like, oh, whatever the Republicans say, that's good. Whatever the Democrats say, I'm with that. Well, that's actually not a good way to look at things, right? And so that basically is the number one. The Second Amendment only gives the right to own guns for use in a militia. Just simply not true.
Right. And then we hear a lot about ARs, AK-15s, which is another point, but I want to set that up because we hear the second one of these arguments is that the Second Amendment only applied to guns of that day, or only applied to muskets. That's not right. That's not, and anything that we do, and when we talk about the Bible on this show, the context of what's being said is also in principle for future. And so let me explain that. Anti-gunners or the gun control side of things, they often do claim in their argument that modern or rapid firearms, they're not protected in this. And so they can reform that. And that's not infringing on the rights of the Americans, because that was never the intention when this was documented. And this argument assumes, first off, that muskets were the only type of arms in existence when the Second Amendment was written. And so our founding fathers never intended the protection to extend to modern firearms. First argument to that would be that repeating rifles were in existence during this, and they were in existence for more than 100 years before the Bill of Rights were included into our Constitution. Second, muskets were military-grade firearms. We have to understand that. These were military-grade firearms that the fathers wrote about. And our founding fathers, this is the context that I'm talking about. Why did they write this? They wrote it to protect our ability to overthrow a tyrannical government, okay? So if there was a government like a communism party, our goal then, as our right as American citizens, is to overthrow that government. That is not a crime. That is a right to overthrow that government. We can't do that like we could if we could scheme it up in a great way and we're like John Wick and we can kill 30 people with a handgun. But guess what? We're not John Wick. And so the purpose of the Second Amendment is to say, listen, if this government has military grade firearms, but the civilians don't, they're highly outnumbered. They're vastly outmatched. And so we need to have a right to bear those type of arms, not for anything other than to be able to overthrow a government that's trying to rule in a criminal way against people. And then the third, if this argument were valid, think about this. Smartphones and social media would not be protected as forms of speech under the First Amendment. I think that's great. I think that's a powerful point there. I mean, we're going to have freedom of speech. And well, back in that day, they didn't have smartphones. They didn't have social media. They didn't have things in order to communicate freely across the world. And these modern rapid fire forms of communication. Have you ever had a woman mad text you? That's rapid fire. That is rapid. All the married men understand when your phone, it starts off usually with a paragraph. It's a slow pump action shotgun, just this big old shot at you.
My goodness.
And then they come out with the Uzi, bro, and they're just laying the finger on the trigger. AK-47 text messages all over the place. That's rapid fire communication. But here's the deal. If that argument were valid, we would see some talk about the freedom of speech not being protected in the social media, in the iPhone communication world. And so we have to understand that when we're making this argument, the context of how we're making this argument and the fact that they were talking about overthrowing the government. And so if the government modernizes, civilization has to modernize with it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And shout out to Ryan Kleckner and the Federalist. They did some really good research and stuff on this. And coming up with some of these here, but I just it's crazy to me. Now this next one you definitely have heard before, okay? And this one is it's crazy to me. Like
this is probably the most popular one.
Yes,
and it's the most mind-boggling one.
Yes, 100%. So the third one is criminals won't have guns if we ban them. This I don't even know what to say. Like,
there's nothing to say. If somebody, and I'll probably get blasted for this, but if somebody looked at me in the face and said, well, criminals won't have them if we ban them, in my mind, I go, there's no help. There's no help that I can offer in this moment. And that's not to be disrespectful, but if that is a line that you hang on, you are severely misinformed and uneducated and unaware of your society.
Right. And the thing is, law-abiding citizens are going to do exactly what that phrase just said. They're going to abide by the law. That's how it is. Yeah. Criminals, they're not going to abide by the law. I don't care what happens. I don't care how many laws you put in place. I mean, that's literally the definition of what a criminal is. It's somebody who doesn't, obey the law, right? So to think somehow that we're going to put a law in place where if we ban guns, that criminals won't get them. Have you heard anything? Have you ever heard of the black market? Like, I mean, have you ever heard of, and here's what I would say. Here's a good example, right? Drugs are illegal. Just let that sink in for a second. Drugs are illegal. Drugs is a billion-dollar industry, but they're banned. They're wrong. If you get stopped with them, like you get.
I'm open a can of worms, Kevin. I'm sorry. I'm trying to hold it in. Yeah, I want you to finish your point. I'm gonna open a can of worms.
Yeah, I mean, so I look at it just like drugs, right? There's really no all drugs, and I know some states have legalized marijuana, all that. I get all of that, right? I totally get that, but the majority of your drugs are banned. I mean, you can't even have in your car. I can't take the pills that I take. I cannot have a bottle of pills that has no label on it, and it could be mine. I could literally have a legitimate prescription, but if I don't have the prescription with me, there is no name on it. There's nothing to tie it to me. I could actually get in trouble
Yep.
for
Yep.
having drugs in my car, that I can't explain where they came from. I could be selling them. The police don't know. They just know I have drugs in my car, right?
Yeah.
So to say for some reason that just because something is banned, that a person that is a criminal is not going to get a hold. If they want to do something, they're going to find a way to do it. We put locks, we put lasers, we have all kinds of stuff in our prisons, right? We've got all kinds of things. We still have people who get out of prison. Why? Because they have hours and days and months to plan it and think about it. Because if that's what they're going to do and they want to do, they find a way to do it, right? How do you think people get out of these maximum security prisons? Like you would seem impossible, but they find a way to do it. And so,
yeah, and the reason that doesn't open a can of worms is it goes back to the Second Amendment. Kevin, before cocaine was in America, how did it get to America? It was smuggled in. Right. Before heroin got to America, how did it get to America? Yeah. It was smuggled in.
Yep.
And we know this to be true. We don't know the depth of it, but who was heading up some of the cartel and some of the mob bosses, who was allowing them to get from Cuba back to Miami? Government. Mm-hmm. Government allowed it. Why? Because money talks.
Yeah.
And there's movies that are coming out about it. There's testimonies coming out about it, about how CIA had supplied guys with planes, and they were pilots that were taken out of airlines and used to go overseas. And then all of a sudden they were being murdered by the same government because they had to cover up their tracks. Guys, this is what I'm talking about. And this is what the Second Amendment is talking about. The forefathers, the founding fathers, they never would have imagined that. But I'm sure they said, listen, if the government were to act in any way, we're going to have to protect ourselves. Right. If the government goes ahead and says, listen, we're going to take all guns away, guess who still has guns? The government. And guess who's still going to import guns to the bad guys? The government. Why? Because money sells. Because crime sells. Because racism sells. Yeah. And so when that's being said, this is what we're talking about. Criminals don't always look like the guy on the street. And some of you are going to have a hard time hearing this from me, but governing officials can be criminals. Some governing officials are criminals, and not just in this way, but a vast majority of them are doing things illegally right now, at this moment. And it would be super naive of us to think that we could trust the government with taking away guns because they're going to support the argument that criminals won't have them, when at times they're the very criminals that do have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a weird twist on it, Kevin, I know, but I'm just saying, like, the government controls everything. So we have to allow ourselves to at least protect what we have. And the best way to do it right now is with modern weapons.
Yeah, and we've seen, I mean, guys, I mean, it's not too far-fetched, right? We've seen where things have been uncovered, where, I mean, in the public, where we've had government officials behind certain things, right? Whether it's drug trafficking, there's times that it's uncovered that police officers are involved, or, whatever the case may be, right? It's there. So, I mean, these are not things that's too far-fetched.
Yeah, and it's not all government, right?
No,
it's just listen. Government is there for checks and balances, and we love that. So don't get us wrong there. But we have individuals in positions, and there's evil in the world, and so every now and then you get an individual that shouldn't have the position, and things come out. And so this isn't like an anti-government speech.
Oh no, absolutely.
This is just anti-bad people speech. And so leads us to our next argument, though, where we hear this a lot. And the reason we hear this one, number 4, the reason we hear this one is because there's a miseducation on the actual guns themselves. And what bothers me, Kevin, is we've even heard the president now and the vice president really quote this wrong. We've heard definitions from senators and governors about what a 30-round clip is. That when you have governing officials that are not educated on guns, but they're pushing gun laws, it's a scary thing.
It is.
But number 4, AR-15s and certain semi-auto rifles should be banned. The reason I don't like this coming from governing officials is because they tie AR-15s and semi-autos, and they call them assault rifles. They call them automatic rifles. They call them weapons of mass destruction. I mean, you label it what you label it, but it's inaccurate. It's entirely inaccurate. And this is the argument right here, Kevin, where gun rights activists begin to lose trust in gun lawmakers, because this is where it begins to feel as if gun rights activists, like if I give in here, there's no stopping what they take from me.
Right. Yep.
There's already military grade weapons that I can't get. So why are you taking my semi-autos? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, wait a minute here. I don't want to, like, this is the top of the line of what I can get without having trouble getting it. Why are you taking this? And so that's where the trust starts to go out the window, and you're like, oh, okay, what's the agenda behind the agenda now? What's going on? And not that there's a substantial evidence of that. It just feels that way at this point. And so Australia did this, and they did it in a pretty convincing way. I mean, it wasn't a forceful way. But what they did is they did a buyback program where they were just like, listen, we want to take your pump style shotguns. We want to take your semi-automatic rifles. We're not going to come bang down your doors and do it. But if you want, we'll buy them off of you. We'll buy them back. And what I think is significant to note here, and this is where when we were doing our research, I remember texting you, Kevin, and going, my mind hurts. Like, my brain literally hurts, because researching Australia, researching France, researching European nations, they did a lot of the stuff America's talking about doing, and there's no conclusive evidence on one way or the other. There's no evidence that says taking the guns away did this, or keeping the guns did. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not enough evidence. So it's all inconclusive. And what it does is it leaves it up to bias. It leaves it back to square one. Hey, we took the guns, but now we're still back to square one.
100%.
Australia's numbers didn't change in any significance with homicides and with deaths. And all it did was guarantee that now those guns were out of those hands. And so that's why an educated guy like me looks at that and goes, so if that's not the main variable, why are we making that the main variable? What's behind this? Because that, to me, I'm being told by my governor, the data, the science. Well, to me, the data and the science is inconclusive. So can we please find something that's a little more conclusive and go after that? If you want me to check data and science. That's me being vulnerable, though. That's me saying, I'm listening to you. I'm collecting data. I'm collecting science. This doesn't add up, but you're telling me it does. So that's where the trust, it really goes out the window. And so that's where, when we start talking about rifles, we start talking about AR-15s, that's where you'll see a lot of guys like me that go, okay, I don't trust this as much. Rifles, although popularized by the media, they're not regularly used in violent crimes. In fact, according to the FBI, hammers, blunt instruments, they're used more than murders than rifles are. We have to be careful, guys, and this goes right along with the racism. Racism exists. Mass shootings, they exist. But you have to understand who controls the media. And I think one of the most disrespectful things our media can do is publicize a murder, not for the murder's sake, but for the agenda's sake. I'm tired of seeing men and women who are slaughtered all over the media because we're pushing gun laws. When we've seen in France that you can take the guns away and people will start throwing bottles of acid at people. Mental health is not a respecter of weaponry. It's not like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it will find its way out. And people want to murder people. And this is not me degrading the fact that guns are violent. Guns are violent, and there needs to be a respect. There needs to be laws to it. But what I'm saying is we have to be careful on what the agenda really is. Now, rifles have been used in some recent mass shootings. However, the shooters at Maryland Fort Hood and Virginia Tech did not use rifles. They did not use rifles. And likewise, Vehicles are most commonly used by drunk drivers, those texting while driving to kill people, and these people don't have a murderous intent. However, many more deaths are caused in this manner, and it is still the fault of the person, not the tool. Because we find out it's the actions of the person, it's the mental stability of the person, it's the negligence of the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to understand what's the main variable. The main variable is the person
Right.
in every
Yeah.
case. It's not the item. And so um, and which is why we lead into the fifth argument. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I think some gun control side, they say, okay, listen, the main variable is the person. It's not necessarily the gun. So what we should do is we have to raise the rifle purchase age to 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I debated this a little bit before the show, and I know you're going to interject here, which I want you to, because I think we see this a little differently. And maybe it's shocking to hear me say this, but as a gun owner, I'm not against this. I'm not against raising it to 21 as long as everything else is raised to 21.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that if we're going to say, hey, listen, you're not adult enough to purchase a rifle until 21, then everything else needs to be raised there. Because again, vehicles are used in this, the negligence of vehicles are used in this, the negligence of 100 other things can be used in this. And so if age is really that much of a variable, that we should raise the age variable all the way up for everything else that we can in life. And it goes back to my statement that age is not the main variable, though. So I'm kind of back and forth, but age is not the main variable. Mental and emotional health doesn't have an age requirement. Lapse in judgment doesn't have an age requirement. My 5-year-old picks up on things that I don't pick up on as a 30-year-old. Lapse in judgment does not have an age requirement. So this argument could partner with banning guns so criminals don't have them. There will always be a way, whether you're 18, you're 19, you're 20. There have been recent murders that have happened, and there were 20-year-olds that got a hold of guns. Some mass shootings were 20-year-olds. They weren't 21. So you're telling me a year's time is going to change that? I don't think that. All I'm saying is I do think that if we're going to raise it to 21, then there needs to be substantial evidence why, and everything else should be raised that way. And if not, then everything should be to 18. I don't
Yeah.
think that we're being congrusive across the board. I don't think that we're being consistent across the board, and we're just throwing things out there because, well, we had a mass shooting. He was 20, so let's raise it to 21. Kevin, to me, that doesn't make sense. There's not enough science behind that.
Yeah. I don't think so either, Kyle. Like I just, and I agree with you. Like if we're gonna raise the age, we should raise it across the board. I guess my thing is, what's the difference between somebody that's 18 and 21? Like to me, I don't think you know half of what you need to know or even know where you're going or what's happening until you're 30. Like I feel like 30 is when you really start getting a handle on life. You start getting a handle on where you are, what's going on, because you're around that time you're starting to have kids or you've had kids and those kids are old enough now, they're 5, 6 years old, whatever the case may be, and you're just learning more of life. And
Mm-hmm.
so between, I guess for me, I look at it 18 years old, 21 years old, it's still super young. And I still think you're in that stage where you're doing stuff because it's trendy or it's cool or it's whatever. It's the same thing we say to our kids about tattoos, right? We
Yeah.
say, yeah, I know at 14 years old you want to get the tattoo of Billy because you love him so much and you think you guys are going to be together forever. But as parents, we say we know that you're not. It's the probability of you being with Billy for the rest of your life starting at 14 is probably, it's just not, it's slim, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I look at it and say, you might think it's cool to go out and grab a gun when you're 18 years old, 19, 20, whatever the case may be. But but really understanding how to handle a firearm, knowing what it's used for, what it's not used for, being responsible, all of that stuff, you can get all the training in the world, but if you're not mature as a person, it doesn't really matter. So my thing is, whether it's 18 or 21, who cares? Like, I mean, that's just my take. Who cares? Now, do I agree with raising the age? Sure. I think anything that we can do to make guns harder for people who should not have them to get, I think is good.
Yeah, and I think we have to understand as a gun owner, like it's going to be easy for me to get the gun. It may
Right.
take a little longer for me to get the gun, but don't mistake it as it's impossible to get my gun now. I think a
Right.
lot of where my side argues, where we go wrong, is we take it as you're taking my rights away. I'm not allowed to get that gun. No, that's not what they're saying. They're saying, listen, if you're 18, you may have to wait 3 more years.
Right. Yep.
Listen, if you're 21, you may have to wait 6 more months because we've got to go through a process. Again, we're going to get you the gun. It's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we take like a lack of time. We take like what we do. We get impatient, right? And we're taking the fact that we're impatient and we're twisting it to say we're just not getting our gun. No, that's not. That's where I have to settle down personally. That's where I have to go. I have to be okay with this because ultimately they're trying to make it safer. They're not making it impossible. They're making it safer.
Right. Yep. 100%. And obviously we have a few more of these, and we want to talk specifically about, can we find this in the Bible? Is there, because we want to be able to apply this scripturally. Like that's the thing. We want to help you navigate culture from a biblical perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested necessarily in, well, it's my side versus your side versus what. No, we are pro what's right. Does it say it in the Bible? Does it back it up in scripture? Where, this whole thing of personal protection, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. Personal protection. Can we protect ourselves? Is it biblical? And we are going to continue this discussion next week because there is so much more that we have to cover. And
we've only gone through 5. We've got another 5 to go, and we want to tell you what Jesus says about it.
Right. And that I think is extremely important. So, again, as you're talking to your family members, your friends, and different ones like that, share the show with them. Right. And make that a discussion point. So, you know what, send it to them, just any of these shows you can share from whatever platform that you listen to it on, and just say, hey, I want you to listen to this, let's talk about it. Right.
Show number 2, would Jesus pack heat?
Right. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. But we're actually going to talk about that. Yeah, so
we are.
Yeah. So here's what I want you to do. If you're listening to us right now, you're listening to us on an Apple device, please scroll down to the bottom and rate and review us, if you will. Also, we'd love for you, listen, you say, hey, how can we help you out? How can we help the show grow? That's one way, right? And we're on every platform, any streaming platform. So if there is a place there where you can leave a review or you can rate us, go ahead and do it, right? There are some places that you can't. So that's why you always hear us say Apple, because Apple has a very good rating system and they have a good place for reviews. And so that's why we always say Apple. And the majority of our listeners are listening on Apple devices. Based on our stats. So that's why we always say that. Also, if you love this show, would you do us a favor? And this just helps us in a great way. Share the show on your social media, right? Just go ahead. I mean, you can share right from the app that you listen to this show, right to your social media. Tell your friends about it, right? Let them know, like, hey, I listened to this show. I think it's really good. And you know what? We don't expect everyone to agree with every single thing that we say. Right? Like I listen to shows all the time that I do not agree with the hosts, right? But I listen because it's good for me, right? To hear both sides of the argument. So
sometimes I don't agree with what I'm saying.
Right.
Because I've been so biased to one side, and then I educate myself and I go, right. I don't feel good, but it's education.
Right. And that's important. So if you want to know how to help us, that's the way you can help us. Share these episodes. In all of those cities that I talked about last time we talked, all the over 200 plus cities that have listened. Then we've got 12 different countries. Guys, share. And that helps us greatly. And so we appreciate every single one of you listening. Listen, next time we're going to jump right back into this discussion. We're going to talk about, is it biblical? Is it, and go from there. God bless you guys. We love you guys. We will see you next week.